Hey, we're continuing in our series, Uncharted, Exploring What Lies Below. And today is a pretty serious thing that we're going to dig into and look down into. I'll be honest with you, sometimes, and it's a joke, I joke when I say this, but sometimes preachers have to manage their hypocrisy. Do you know what I'm talking about? Every once in a while, God will give us a text. Brett, some of you are smiling and laughing. We have to manage our hypocrisy. We have to be humble about this because once in a while, a text comes along that we need to preach on that we're not there yet. I need to tell you to get there, but I'm not there yet, right? I need to tell you what it says, but I'm not there yet. So we kind of manage that. And this is the text today, Philippians 2, chapter 2, verse 5 through 11. You know, that should not be there. There you go. Go back. Stay with me, okay? Don't go too fast. I believe power has a way of corrupting people. It makes them crazy. We are talking today about a king. This is the day we celebrate Jesus coming as a king. And when you think of power, most of us don't understand what it's like to live under a king, right? We've lived in the United States under presidency, but just about 100 years ago, there was a lot more kings and queens and emperors in the world, but we don't know what it's like. But these people have like ultimate power. And I think sometimes that power can quickly go to your head. So I thought it'd be fun to go out and pull a couple of people out of history where I believe the power went to their head. The first one was a man named Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. Maybe you know him better in the history books as Caligula. Caligula was the third emperor of Rome. He was actually a Roman emperor during the time of 37 AD, around the time that Jesus was gone now and the Bible was being sort of written and talked about and Paul was traveling and all of these things. So he would have been the emperor. He started out really good. He was in his early 20s. He started out this guy who did all the right things, said all the right things. People had hope in Caligula that he was going to be a great emperor, but he got power. The Senate put him in power, and he became the emperor, and it wasn't long before it went to his head. He started calling himself a god. He began executing anyone who would consider that he considered a threat to his power. He ruined Rome's economy. This is all, now keep in mind, this is all in 4 years' time. He ruined Rome's economy with extravagant spending. Usually it was on himself and on his horse. He loved his horse. He would kill you, but he loved his horse. As a matter of fact, he wanted to build his horse its own castle. He mismanaged military campaigns, alienated the legions, and he seized the property of leading citizens of Rome to make up for his mistakes. In just 4 years of rule, he was murdered by a group. Now get this, and some of them were his own bodyguard. That's how bad Caligula was. Maybe you've heard of King Leopold II. This is a little bit more modern history. King Leopold II was the king of Denmark. He was king during this intense colonization of Africa. Europe was going to Africa and colonizing it. So he took possession for himself a very large piece of land and a large group of people of what we would consider today to be the Dominican Republic of the Congo. He convinced the European leaders to let him have this land, this colony, for his own personal whatever, because he was going to make life better for the people. And they bought into it. And King Leopold, they bought into this humanitarian king and approved his colony. They were impressed with his humanitarian vision. But the truth is, he was a brutal and violent ruler. He took power and it went to his head. As king, he robbed the country blind. He literally worked the people to death in the mines. The pictures you're looking at, he was well known for amputating hands and feet if you crossed him or did something wrong. This was punishment. His ambition and his lust for wealth and for more power, listen, during his rule, nearly half of the people of the Congo died. Half. And then there's this guy. We know this guy, right? He's all over the news. Nobody's seen him for a while, but he's all over the news. Here's an example of someone where power has gone to their head. He's lusting after certain lands and people and resources, and he's using violence and war. It's gone to his head. Power is something that when you grab a hold of it, it can go to your head quick. But power will quickly expose what lies below the surface of a person's life. As a matter of fact, Abraham Lincoln said this: nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you really want to know the test of a person's character, give them power. Give them authority. The moment we have a sense of entitlement or a title, right? Or privilege, it will test you and what's really below the surface of your life. Often what lies below the surface, past what we display to everyone else, is selfishness, selfish ambition, vain conceit, individualism that looks out for number one. When someone gets power and the power to do whatever they want, what lies below the selfishness and the conceit and the need to just look out for number one sort of comes out, and we use that power against one another. And given any sort of power, we will bring to the surface, given any sort of power, it will bring to surface those things that we really don't see in ourselves. Paul, the Apostle Paul, was having problems with the Philippian church. And some of what I'm talking about was what he was dealing with. It doesn't come out and just say specifically what he's dealing with, but in Philippians chapter 2, in the verses right before verse 5, verses 3 and 4, we get a glimpse of what Paul might be dealing with, because something is happening in the community of the church. Something is happening in the people and the relationships and what's happening in that church, and Paul addresses it here. Paul's having this problem of an individualistic view of life, that my life is my life and your life is your life, and I will use what power and authority and privilege I have to gain for me good luck. Good luck. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others better than yourself. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. Like I said, we don't know exactly what the issue was. We don't know what the fight was about. But we know this, that some in the Jesus community in Philippi were using whatever freedom, whatever individualism, authority, power, whatever you want to say it is, they were using it in a way that was hurting the community of faith. They were living their lives in a way that was not the Jesus way. They were living a way of life that hurt and broke the community. Selfish ambition. He says selfish ambition. What is selfish ambition? Well, it's selfishness. People were only interested in what they thought, their opinion, their ideas, their way, whatever benefits that they could gain from a situation. Their personal agendas was their selfish ambition. Vain conceit. What is vain conceit? It's a pompous mind with ears that are hungry for praise, for compliments, but a mouth that is short on them. Vain conceit is to want people to look at you and praise you and say nice things about you and look at you in a way that lifts you up. That's vain conceit. Look out only for their own interests. What were they doing? Their hearts had little room for others. They were more worried about their own lives and their personal family lives. And there were other people in the church, and they were not looking out for one another. Hands that would serve the self instead of others. If it didn't benefit me, why am I involved? I'm out. So Paul is not opposed to individualism. If you read in other places in Paul's writings, he very much believes in personal responsibility. Paul believes in personal responsibility, that you're responsible for yourself, and you should be individual enough to take responsibility for your own actions, but we should bear one another's burdens as well. He teaches us that, yes, be responsible, but yes, you should also bear one another's burdens. The problem is, if minding my own business means I'm unwilling to bear your burden, that is a destructive thing in the community of faith. And that's what was happening. Paul says people who cling to their rights, their titles, their privileges, whatever power they have, they contradict the gospel. They contradict the very person that created us, the church. They contradict his character and his will. They contradict the gospel and the very person that we have gathered here to sing about and praise and worship. We no longer belong to Christ. We no longer have comfort from his love. And we no longer have fellowship in the Spirit. Go back to verse 1 of chapter 2 and you'll see what Paul's saying there. We have forfeited these things that God wants for us because we look out for number one. We're not loving one another as we should, and we're using whatever power we have. I know we look at these kings and these rulers and we think, well, none of us will ever have that kind of power. And that may be true, but every one of us has the power to love another or to push another one away. Every one of us has the power to be selfish and looking to our own interest. So Paul reminds them in a beautiful hymn. In verses 5 through 11, he reminds them, he exhorts them to have the same mind that Jesus has. Look at verse 5. It says, you must have the same attitude. Some of your translations say the same mind. It's this idea that in Jesus' mind and heart, he was about this. He was about this. He was about loving one another, dying for one another, emptying self. Have this same attitude that Christ Jesus had. But in there lies the problem. Once I learn what Jesus' attitude is, once I learn how Jesus lived his life, once I see in the scriptures, wow, he's a King of kings and Lord of lords. Why would he do this? When I see the type of person Jesus is, I pull back. I pull back. It's a problem for me because who wants to lose whatever they've gained? Philippians verse 6. Chapter 2 verse 6. Though he was God, there's the hymn. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Verse 7. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God. And listen, and he died a criminal's death on the cross. That's your king. Last week, Pastor Brett had that neat video about that's my king. That's your king. I don't know about you, but whatever rights, whatever privileges, whatever titles, whatever given authority or assumed authority, whatever I have, I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose what I've gained. It's hard for us to lay our lives down because we spend so much of our time trying to build our lives up. And as a matter of fact, as Americans, we learn this from a very early age, that you have rights and you will fight for your rights. Jesus had rights Jesus had rights. This hymn is not just a moral formula for us. It's not just a checkoff list. It's not just a 3-point strategy for personal advancement. It's not, you cannot break this out and say, okay, if there's 3 things that I need to do, okay, I need to do this and I need to do that. And if I do these 3 things, I'll be successful in life. We cannot look at it that way. Paul gives us this hymn as a complete picture of what Jesus' attitude and mind is all about. If I just want some formula to succeed in life, that leads me in the wrong direction. That actually is more self-serving than what Jesus really did. If I look at the Bible and I use the Bible and I use Jesus' attitude and mind in things, and I think, okay, I'm going to give this up, I'm going to lay down, because if I do, I'll gain something. It's not humble yourself now, and eventually you will be number 1. Jesus followers, listen to me. We follow Jesus not because he offers success and a place at the top. It's not last now and first later. We don't lay our lives down because we know that we will be vindicated. It's not the message that Paul is giving us in the hymn of the mind of Christ. What Paul really wants us to see this morning is this: that Jesus emptied himself. In the original language, this is what the text is all about. It literally means he emptied himself. He poured it out. He poured it out on a group of people that he thought it might as well just pour it out on the ground and soak into the ground. He poured his life out, not for a reward, not for something that he could gain. He poured his life out and died without a promise of reward. I love what Fred Craddock, a preacher that I follow and listen to, he said this: the grave of Christ was a cave, not a tunnel. What does he mean by that? It means he went into the grave, he went to the cross and went into a hole in the ground without any way out of it, and they rolled a stone in front of it, and that was it. Jesus didn't die for us. He didn't lay down his life for us for a reward. He didn't lay down his life and said, well, I'll do this now because, I'm going to get mine at the end. That was not the mind of Christ. He didn't suffer and die for the glory of it. He did not go to the cross for the reward of it. Jesus did it for you and for me. He simply did it because he loved you. He simply did it because he poured his life out for you. He emptied himself of all of his rights, all of his divine privileges. Everything that was about him and the divinity that he was, the God he was, he poured that out, became human, and he served us. And not only did he serve us, but he served us to the point of death on a cross. Verse 9 says this: therefore, because Christ emptied himself for you and me, God elevated him to the place of highest honor. God did that for him and gave him the name above other names. Verse 10. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. Verse 11. And every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Jesus is Lord. Listen to me. Jesus is an odd king. When I think of kings, and I showed you some kings earlier, that's kind of the picture we get. We get the picture of people who have fought for their land, gained their land. I even think of King David. King David established his kingdom through violence and war and death. He expanded you understand that when King David became into power, and Israel grew and grew and grew, that people groups had to die for that, right? I think of kings as all powerful and all, having all the authority, and that they could just say the word and they could kill you. I picture kings as this pomp and circumstance and celebratory visions of kings on horses, powerful people. But Jesus is an odd king. Jesus is an odd king because he's none of that. He's none of that. Jesus is the best of us. Jesus, the way he came to us is odd. I mean, who would have really thought God would come to the poorest of poor and the smallest of small and the most challenging of challenging circumstances? But he did that. He came to us, the one who chose to come, one who had unimaginable power, the creator of the universe. He could have come to us with a power that he had and make us do what he wants. He could have just showed up instead of as a baby in a manger. He could have just showed up as this powerful king with authority. We believe it is the strong, the privileged, the wealthy, the powerful, the entitled who have the power. He could have come to us on a white stallion, ready for battle, to fight off our enemies, swords blazing, amazing power and glory. He could have used his authority and power to create a world that makes sense. The hymn, though, is an interesting hymn. It shows us an odd king who lived differently. He lived differently. The way he came was odd. But it's also odd the way he rules us. Instead of using his power to strike fear in us, that motivates us to be obedient, he empties himself for you and gives you a choice. Instead of using his power to gain personally, he empties himself so that you might gain something. Instead of using his divine privilege to get what he really wants, he empties himself of all of those things so that you might be privileged. Jesus laid down his divinity so that you could be divine. Jesus laid down his authority and power so that you might become privileged people. We kind of expect someone, especially a king, to use that power and authority to make things happen. But instead, Jesus, when he came and lived out his kingdom, they killed him for it. So the attitude of Jesus is this: that true power, the way that you get what you want in life, it doesn't come through manipulation or authority or gaining some privilege or gaining some certain amount of money. It doesn't come through violence or tearing another person down so that you might gain something. The way that you gain in life, the way that you come into the true power of what God has, those who cling to their rights, living for oneself, that's not true power. True power, the way that you get it, it cannot come through that way. True power is found when you lay down your life for another. True power, because Jesus said it to Pilate, you don't take my life. You have the power to take my life, but I'm not giving you that power. I'm laying it down. True power is found in emptying oneself of all your rights, all your titles, all your privileges. True power is found not in the mighty, but in the meek. True power is found not in strength, but in obedience. True power is found in love, loving one another more than we love ourselves. We are who we are, the church, not because our king won some great battle, not because our king won some great war. He did not establish Christianity in the earth and the church and his bride through violence and earthly ways. We are who we are, and Paul reminds the Philippians of this. We are who we are, and you've forgotten this, Philippians, and so have we sometimes. We are who we are because he loved us all the way to the cross. The war was won there. The battle was won there as he continued to pour out his life for you and me. Once and for all, it is finished. Once and for all, it is done. We don't have to fight that war anymore. Jesus has poured out his life for you. And Paul, talking to the Philippians, he's talking to them saying, you've got this wrong, guys. Our king is a king who empties, not takes in. Our king is a king of meekness and mildness, not power and might. Our king is a lamb who's going to the slaughter. So what does that mean for us? Beth's going to come. We're going to close in a song. It means this. If you want to be the real, powerful, effective people of God, if we want to be the church, if we want to be who God calls us to be, we must take on the mind of Christ. Not the mind of a king who is the King of kings and Lord of lords. Not the mind of an earthly king, but a heavenly king. We need to take on the mind of Christ, and we need to love one another to the point that we will empty whatever I need to empty in myself to bear your burden, to be your partner in this, to love you as Christ loved me. And Paul's reminding the Philippians of this. You all forgotten why you're even a church. Remember the one who started it all, Jesus. It is finished. Christ is won. Christ is won. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this message. I pray, Lord, as we sing this song, move in our hearts as we go into Easter week. May we all just be overly sensitive to what the Spirit is calling us to do. May we look below the surface, Lord, at the selfishness and the conceit and the ambition that we have, Lord. May we look deep within ourselves and say, you know, I live my life for me. And it's not working. Something's wrong. I need to live differently. Let Jesus go deep in your soul. Let him deal with that selfishness and that unwillingness to love others. And there you will find a power like Jesus. There you will find freedom from the striving. Jesus, go deep in our hearts. For we are selfish people, and we need you. We need your mind today.